Is 2025 going to be a boom or a bust year for the solar industry? From big political changes coming to DC to grid integration and storage challenges, the solar industry is ripe with opposition. Keep watching for the 5 biggest challenges that could make or break solar. All right, Larry. So one of the biggest things that I can think of that's going to impact the solar industry in 2025 is the availability of domestically made content to meet the requirements of the IRA for the additional 10% adder.
Yeah, that's going to be a big one, Warren. And really, the challenge there is, we've manufactured very little solar in the U.S. in the last decade or two.
Yeah.
And now suddenly, the IRA is not only giving manufacturers incentives, tax credits to manufacture in the U.S., but they're also saying, hey, if you use enough domestic content on some projects, you get a higher tax credit. So there's going to be a rapid shift to use these domestically made products. And the question is, what's that supply-demand balance going to be between the demand for the product and the supply? Is it going to match nicely, or is there going to be way too much supply or not enough supply? So that's one of the challenges that we're going to face.
And we know the demand is there.
The demand really appears to be there.
Yeah.
Yep, for U.S.-made products.
Yeah. Another thing that I think can really impact 2025 when it comes to solar are interest rates. We saw last year, or this year and last year, that high interest rates really all but decimated the residential solar market. And we're starting to see that come back, but if interest rates continue to stay the same or increase, that could have an impact. And conversely, if we start to see them go down, I think that could create a boom.
Absolutely, yeah. That's especially, like you said, in the residential space, because their customers are comparing the cost of going solar with the cost of my electric bill. In the commercial space, in some cases, there's some more incentives that kind of negate some of those financing constraints. But really, overall, that's going to make a big difference in 2025.
So let's talk about, Larry, political uncertainty, or maybe some certainty now that we have some direction of the new administration for next year.
Knowing who's going to be in the White House
Yeah.
and who's going to control the Senate, and potentially here in the very near future who's going to control the House, is going to be very helpful, because then we're going to know.
Right.
I know that a lot of people in the solar industry are going to be very, very concerned about a Republican sweep, which is what it's looking like right now, of the House, the Senate, and the White House. I'm not so concerned about that, because I think the IRA is entrenched enough that I think most of it's going to stay. And I think it's benefited enough of Republican areas that I think both parties value it enough that I think it's going to stay. So I'm not super concerned about that. Where I maybe be a little more concerned is on the state level. If states go one way or the other, it could really shift state policy. But I think at the federal level, I think that policy is pretty much going to be intact. We'll see.
And just to be clear, we're recording this video the morning after the election, so we don't have clarity yet on the House and the Senate. Actually, the final election, it appears as if the Trump administration has won the election, but we don't know for certainty what Congress is going to look like at this point.
So it's up in the air.
It is.
It's going to affect 2025. Exactly how it's going to affect 2025 is unknown, but I'm not overly concerned about it at this point. I think, like I said, the IRA is the big piece that I think is probably going to stay.
Yeah.
But we'll see.
Yeah. Net metering, Larry, that's a big one that could really change things in states. When you talk about state-specific incentives, net metering comes to mind for me. And we're seeing that already in places like Virginia and other states. We've already seen those changes. I think that could have an impact on solar in 2025.
Yeah, net metering is a big one. If net metering goes away completely, in my mind, that's more of a threat to solar than repealing the IRA, for example. Net metering has been the hallmark of making solar work in a lot of states for decades, and it's a big deal. It's already gone away to some extent in New York. Like you mentioned, Virginia. California, obviously, we saw how things work there when you change net metering, how their market just went down dramatically for a period of time.
Yeah.
So that's something that we're watching closely. There's 2 things I would say to that. Number one is do solar while net metering is still there, if you can.
Absolutely.
There's, like you mentioned, Virginia. There's also changes coming in West Virginia. Do solar while you can. The other thing that's kind of interesting, Warren, and I say interesting, that's a little bit different than that metering discussion, is the idea of closed circuit areas, which is obviously bad for solar. You can't install any solar on those closed circuits, or you can only install a certain size in some areas. But what's interesting is the idea of utilities throttling production to kind of help balance the grid and solar production. So we're seeing that in PPL.
Right. And we're seeing the closed and restricted areas really on the Delmarva Peninsula. So I think these are two topics that really fall under the grid integration. Number one, as we know, solar doesn't provide energy during the nighttime or really cloudy days, and so the utilities have to be able to manage that. And the one way they're doing that is by taking control of the inverters and being able to lower production. And the other issue we're seeing are what you talked about, the closed circuit areas where there's just insufficient infrastructure either on the substation side or places to send the electricity for additional solar to be installed. And we're seeing more and more of those closed and restricted circuit areas coming.
Yep, and it's going to become more of a problem. I mean, I think eventually infrastructure catches up and allows more solar to be built. But closed circuit areas is a real challenge. Now, I'm going to talk about PPL just for a little bit here.
Yep.
Because it's an interesting situation where for some of our customers, PPL Utilities is restricting the output of the inverter by up to 10%.
Right.
Now, what does that mean? What that means is probably a loss of production maybe in the range of 3 to 5% if they would do that 24/7 for a whole year.
Right.
They're not going to do that 24/7, but they could if they wanted to. So that sounds like a challenge because the utility is controlling my inverter.
Sure.
But the benefit is we're going to be able to install a lot more solar in PPL territory than we can in some areas in the Eastern Shore. So we're going to have to balance the needs of the utility and the grid with, adding more solar and renewables to the grid.
One other thing we could talk about is really the negativity surrounding the industry. And it's been that way for years. And due to some bad actors, installers who just haven't done well, and then some external factors like high interest rates, which have really had installers go out of business. And that leaves a stain on the industry as a whole. And obviously, poor practices, business practices. I think that could have an impact going into 2025.
Absolutely. I mean, you talk about, is 2025 going to be boom or bust? I mean, it could be a bust year, it could be a boom year, it could be anywhere in between.
Yeah.
And that makes it really challenging to run a business, especially right now, residential solar business. And so we've seen a lot of residential companies that were kind of on the edge. They were kind of doing okay. And as soon as things went down, they're out of business, unfortunately. Yeah. And that suddenly there's a lot of customers that don't have an installer to help them if they're, if they have an issue with their system, if their system wasn't installed properly, or whatever the case may be. So that's a problem that will need to continue to be addressed within the solar industry. And I think, Warren, what's critical there is that companies like Paradise Energy Solutions and other companies like us develop strong O&M departments that can help maintain some of these systems. You also mentioned bad actors.
Yeah.
That's another problem. Sales companies that are taking people across that are really feeding them lies about what solar can and can't do. And that's very unfortunate, and that's also very bad for the industry and could cause some people to say, you know what, I'm just not going to do solar at all if that's the case.
Yeah, and then when you have companies going out of business or going bankrupt, and I read the statistics, something along the lines of 16 out of the 20 largest residential solar companies were either went out of business or on the verge of bankruptcy in the last 18 months. And when you have warranty claims and you need service from those companies, that's a real challenge and can really put a stain on the industry too.
Yeah, now to be fair, there's a lot of good companies.
Yes, there are. We're right here.
That's kind of the balance that you have to look at.
All right, Larry, so what about some challenges with product reliability or the financial stability of some of the solar manufacturers?
Yeah, so that's been a challenge through the years.
Yeah.
I mean, because of this boom and bust cycle, we've seen manufacturers that have come and gone. We've seen manufacturers with significant reliability issues that eventually got out of business. We've seen some with significant reliability issues that straightened their path and actually made it work. Enphase is a classic example of that.
Yeah.
A decade ago, they were having all kinds of issues with their products. They turned things around. They're making a quality product today, and they're back in business and doing okay.
Yeah.
But with this challenge in the residential solar industry, not just in the U.S., but also in Europe, actually maybe even more pronounced in Europe, we're seeing companies like SolarEdge, like Enphase, like Tigo, that are having significant financial stress and challenges. And that could be a problem if any of these companies were to go out of business, that's a major issue in the industry. I think there's going to be a rebound. I think these companies are going to be okay. I think they're built solidly enough. The technology's there, but that's something that it's incumbent, on us as an installer to just make sure that we're using companies that are reliable and financially stable.
Do you have any questions about these challenges or a general question about solar? Drop them in the comments below. We're here to help. Then check out our In the Loop series for regular updates on industry news and challenges like these. But before you go, subscribe to our channel, click like, and leave your questions and feedback in the comments below. Thank you for watching.